Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the GSPIA Connect Capstones. My name is Lydia Morin. I'm the Executive Director of Connect and co-instructor of this course with Dr. George Doherty, who is somewhere and he will unmute himself.
I'm here.
Welcome. So before we jump into anything, in honor of the passing of our founder, Dr. Dave Miller, rather than having a moment of silence today, we're going to have a moment of networking, just because that is something that he wasn't super silent, but he loved to network and he loved the power of relationships. We don't have a ton of time, but we want to give these future GSPIA grads a chance to meet some of you practitioners in a smaller room. So what we're asking you can do is share who you are, what brought you here today, and exchange your LinkedIns. So you can maybe start a conversation right on LinkedIn right after this with a question you have about their presentation or something. Maybe you ask them to connect you to somebody else that you met in this presentation because that was something that was more interesting to your day-to-day work. And that's sort of just the magic of networking, right? So here we go. We're going to put you in breakout rooms just for about 3 or 4 minutes. Everybody introduce themselves. Let everybody, explain why they're here, and then share that information with each other. And then we'll come right back into it. And our students are very eager to share what they've learned and from a lot of you. So here we go. Read. Awesome, thanks. Okay, well, welcome back from that moment of networking in honor of Dave Miller. We're so thrilled that you were able to be here today and do that with our Connect Capstone students. Without further ado, we have about 25 minutes for each presentation. It'll be about 10 to 12 minutes of presentation and about 10 to 12 minutes of conversation after each. Please don't be shy. All of your feedback will be incorporated in the final presentations and the final drafts of the reports that will go to Connect's Executive Committee. So we're thrilled to begin. George, any last?
No, I just want to say, first, I really want to thank all of you for being here. The students, they put in a lot of work, not just from the collecting data and analyzing it, but from making contacts, kind of structuring the problems and concerns that were presented to them. And so we're really, really excited about the work that they've done in these presentations. They've done dry runs of everything. And so they're really ready to go. And the final reports will be ready in the next week or two. And so you will have access to the work that they've done in a more formal manner. With that, I think we're ready to go.
Okay, take it away, COG team. So just for your viewing pleasure, by the way, if you go into speaker mode, if you go under the view camera and you go to speaker, you should be able to see all the speakers of the students to the right of the presentation. So everyone, we're gonna have, may begin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the presentation on Councils of Government in Pennsylvania, their state and opportunities. This research has been, apologize for that. This research has been prepared by Natalia Goodnow, Zhixuan Yu, and Coffee Kangbo. We would like to thank the Congress of Neighboring Communities for the research initiative, and we want to thank everyone who agreed to find time in their busy schedules in the midst of pandemic to talk to us about councils of government. We also would like to express our sincere gratitude to our advisors, Ann Lewis, Amanda Settlemeyer, and Susan Hockenberry, for their willingness to share their expertise. They're true experts in the subject matter of intergovernmental cooperation, and their passion is contagious. To understand the state of councils of government today, we interviewed 10 executive directors, 2 elected officials, 2 municipal managers, and 1 COG consultant. Conducting our research, we relied on semi-structured interviews as the main qualitative research technique. Interviews have showed us that COGs comprise dedicated individuals who are devoted to regional work. Yet there is a strong sense that these intergovernmental organizations are underutilized and underfunded. Councils of governments are competing for the same funds that have been shrinking over time. This leaves COGs little to no room to expand their capacity, especially when it comes to human capital. However, our interviewees named various benefits that come from being a COG member. COGs tend to identify niches in service that are not currently occupied, and in cases where multiple COGs are present, like in Allegheny County, they tend to specialize. They do not compete with private sectors, and they often see themselves in the business of sales by offering services they need to stay competitive and cost-effective. COGs create a level playing field for all members, allowing for small municipalities to act as big ones. Most importantly, intergovernmental nature makes COGs credible advocates for original solutions on the state level, because they represent interests of multiple municipalities.
Since funding resources are very important for COGs to provide better services and to conduct projects, we examined COGs strategies around revenue streams. There are three traditional resources of revenue for COGs: municipal contributions, grants in aid, and the user fees. However, through our research, we found that many COGs are using unique approaches to obtain revenues in order to get rid of the dependence on a single funding source. We summarize the 6 approaches. As we can see, 3 of them on the left side are focused on external incomes that COGs can get, while the right side focus more on the internal cost allocations. Due to time constraints, I mainly explained 2 of them. If you have any questions about these approaches, please feel free to ask in the Q&A session. First, COGs can engage in fiscal sponsorship if they have a nonprofit status. This practice allows us to offset their own administrative costs. Although it is a competitive space, COGs are able of competing. In-kind payments are mainly for some municipalities with sparse populations and scarce resources. These municipalities are eager to join programs or receive services, but they are unable to come up with a corresponding proportion of funds because of their tight budget. Therefore, some COGs accept in-kind contributions in place of monetary fees.
Over the course of interviews, several themes emerged in connection to factors that influence COGs operations. When it comes to administrative structure, COGs vary in the amount of staff and in the number of subdivisions they have. It is not uncommon for COGs to have only one full-time staff member, the executive director. Executive directors often generate ideas and serve as the connective tissue of COGs. They stay in touch with the member municipalities to be aware of their needs. As a result, they often come up with policy suggestions. We've observed that COGs with only one full-time staff have a lot of flexibility. The executive director can move faster on certain programs and ideas because they have less administrative processes to go through. However, losing an active executive director with a lot of expertise and institutional knowledge can be disruptive to a COGs operation. On the other hand, we have similar examples of COGs with a considerable staff size where the administrative structure is more complex. Such COGs have more complex procedures for policy vetting and approval, which can slow down programs implementation. Yet such COGs are less susceptible to negative effects associated with departure of any one staff member, which eases continuity of programming. Another factor that affects COGs operations is the history and context of a COGs establishment. Events of the past often determine how much interaction exists between the county and the COG, as well as the level of collaboration between municipalities within COGs. For example, areas where COGs undergone consolidation may require more strategic relationship building. The context of the COGs establishment can also influence the organization's visibility in the region. Since COGs often start in an attempt to solve some pressing regional problems, they can become associated with only one specific program or service. COGs expand their portfolio of services over time, yet their visibility may be low due to their perceived image of focusing on one exclusive project. This prevents COGs from growing their membership naturally. COGs administrative structure and the portfolio of services reflects changes that happen within the region. COGs can consolidate or dissolve over time. They may also not be able to provide specific services due to change in their membership makeup. Seasoned COGs often develop systems of departments, working groups, or committees that are responsible for specific projects. Additionally, historical context influences what type of services are required in the region. For example, events of 9/11 heightened the need for robust police and emergency response. Later, we will discuss lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Geography and membership make up additional factors affecting COGS operations. Geography helps COGs organize around an industry, a university, or an airport. Like the picture shows, municipalities around State College formed COG as a cluster. This geographic feature will affect the services and programs that COGs provide. That is, COGs in different geographic locations have different interests. For example, one COG covers the service area of the airport preferred to carry out police and security programs. Natural boundaries of COGs can be created with certain municipalities being too small to join, and there is isolation of small rural municipalities. Well, as for members, first of all, there is a stark contrast between the joining and leaving of municipal members because of COG's voluntary nature. Its members can choose to leave at any times without being bound by laws or terms. However, the joining of a new member requires applications and vetting process. In addition, small municipalities tend to have part-time employees, whereas larger municipalities have professional managers. These have an impact on COG's decisions making and plans implementation. Finally, COG's operations depend on policy interests of elected officials since the board comprises them.
Since this research has been conducted in the larger context of the pandemic, we decided to share with you some observations related to COG's operation during this unusual time. Just like any entity that involves people working together, COGs were also affected by the restrictions imposed due to COVID-19 outbreak. Social distancing and lockdowns affected COG's meeting schedules, forcing them to transition to online platforms. Due to limited broadband access in remote and less affluent communities, cooperation and relationship building becomes more difficult. In addition, not all municipal offices are equipped with cameras to conduct meetings virtually. This contributes to isolation of certain communities. The pandemic also showed that COGs can be an invaluable resource for their region when it comes to data collection and curation. Some COGs found that they have the capacity to fill the niche of being the data bank and the one-stop shop for COVID-related information. Finally, we've observed that some COGs facilitated their members' response to the pandemic, helping them to have a more uniform strategy. Regions where COGs were not involved in the response strategies saw the members developing individual approaches. Down the road, COGs ended up responding to the public's questions about the guidelines that differed between municipalities. To sum up our findings, we would like to finish our presentation by leaving you with several suggestions for further consideration. Based on the themes that emerged in the course of interviews, we have identified some areas of opportunity. We acknowledge that our suggestions require both human and financial capital that COGs often report they don't have. Consequently, our solutions may require inter-COG partnerships, collaborations with other intergovernmental organizations, policy think tanks, and universities. Inter-COG communication, as well as communication with various stakeholders, appears to be something that all COGs are trying to improve, yet not all COGs in the PayCOG directory have functioning websites. Having a shared person in charge of communication and information sharing would be beneficial. Such hire could happen on COG, inter-COG, or PayCOG level, but would require additional financial commitments. Alternatively, COGs could collaborate with universities and policy think tanks to develop toolkits and templates for the most common types of communications. We also suggest affinity groups as a way of sharing best practices related to a specific type of services. On its page titled Intergovernmental Cooperation A to Z, PayCOG already lists various services that COGs provide, with 15 services identified as the most common. PayCOG lists councils that provide those types of services. This information can form the basis of formal affinity groups. PACOG could also host a library of supporting documents relevant for each group. The library could be accessed only by the organization's members and function as a recruitment tool for new COGs. On a regional level in Allegheny County, the University of Pittsburgh Center of Metropolitan Studies and Connect could become partners in this initiative. Strategic and contingency planning is another area of opportunity. As the current pandemic demonstrates, emergency requires flexibility and causes a mission creep. The strategic plan allows for COGs to regain their focus once they can operate as usual, while contingency plan could help them establish some guidelines, principles for how COG members cooperate in the face of regional emergency. Collaboration with organizations like PA Futures and Pennsylvania Electronic Government Consortium or local universities could also help COGs with educational needs for municipal staff, especially in small municipalities. Given the fact that small boroughs and townships tend to have a part-time staff, online on-demand training may be ideal. Partnering with universities could allow COGs to generate a library of relevant webinars based on COGs need assessment. Finally, we hope that such organizations as Connect would continue research related to COGs and facilitate need assessment surveys. COGs contribute to the quality of life of thousands of people, and they deserve more support and attention. Thank you for your listening, and we will be happy to answer any of your questions.
Wonderful, thank you. Let's return back to the full gallery, and we'll have we have about 9 minutes left to chat about COGs. I love some of those recommendations. I'm sure others will as well. Feel free.
Thank you, Lydia. All right. Is everyone, make sure everyone's pinned first.
Working on it. You can start.
Okay. All right, great. Well, hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. This year's report is titled Developing Collaborative Capacity to Enhance Municipal Level Fire Services in Allegheny County, where we'll be taking a deep dive into some of the issues facing volunteer fire departments in this region. And just before we begin, just a quick introduction of who we are. We're graduate students from the University of Pittsburgh's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs, GSPIA, working in partnership with the Congress of Neighboring Communities, or Connect. My name is Brett Stewart.
My name is Yingzi Liu.
And I'm Zoe Birch.
And if you have any questions after the presentation, please feel free to reach out to us. We have a Q&A, but our information is provided here and at the end of the presentation as well. And we just want to give a quick shout out to all of those who worked with us, from the many interviews with fire chiefs, elected officials, who helped us with our case studies, our project discussions, and more. We would especially like to acknowledge our Fire Advisory Committee, who helped spearhead a lot of the aspects of this project, coordinating with us at every step of the way, and who have been instrumental in honing our ideas to reach some of this year's conclusions. We are incredibly grateful for all the time and energy you gave us to build this ever-growing project. Thank you. Now, why are we working on this? What's at stake regarding the current structure of volunteer fire departments? Well, it started with this idea of how can we improve fire service delivery in Allegheny County? What we first discovered was that Allegheny County has a history of community-based approaches to providing fire services directly to its residents based on their municipality. Pennsylvania has a history of this decentralization in its structure, which is added to one would say, a growing proliferation of volunteer fire departments because of the level of municipalities. The state of Pennsylvania is third in most municipalities behind Illinois and Minnesota, and it holds 12% of the nation's 20,000 all volunteer fire companies, more than any other state. And just Allegheny County alone, just to put it in perspective, holds 130 different municipalities with 180 plus fire companies. Now, historically, this has originally been a blessing both for the PA state government and for local residents who've had numerous volunteer fire departments support them during a crisis, combined with acting as a conduit to increase social capital for communities, from supporting town parades to fire hall gatherings. But due to improved technology and better code enforcement and the amount of municipalities in Pennsylvania, Some of these challenges have trickled into our volunteer fire departments, creating new challenges, such as an overextension of resources mixed with declining demand for fire services, revenue shortfalls, and sometimes a duplication of efforts between fire departments. The amount of fire companies mixed with these challenges and declining demand has resulted in a decline of volunteerism and retention problems. But more critically, we've observed a breakdown of collaborative practices and some uncertainty regarding the lack of key relationship building steps between the people who need to collaborate more effectively to solve these issues, such as the volunteer fire chiefs, along with their elected officials, and with the public at large. Now I'll turn it over to my colleague who will explain our data collection approach.
As first stated, the challenge of improving fire service in Connect starts with building partnerships. However, I would first like to introduce how we got there in our research, which was primarily a quantitative-based approach. We met with many different fire chiefs, firefighters, regional consultants, Department of Economic Development officials, and elected officials through meetings, interviews, and case studies. We also worked closely with an advisory committee composed of dedicated elected officials, fire chiefs, and firefighters who share our view that fire department in Allegheny County needs serious restructuring to adapt to today's trends. However, our main component was a series of focus group where we invited nearly every fire chief in Allegheny County and asked 3 open-ended questions to check the temperature for the region and see what was on the mind of Allegheny County fire chiefs. During our focus group sessions, we started with 3 themes and utilized 1 question each to better understand the view of the fire chiefs. By asking, describe your relationship with your municipality, we explored the relationship between participants affiliated with fire department and their elected officials. By asking, what role do you see volunteer fire department playing in the future of municipal fire service? We try to understand how they view volunteer department for the future. And finally, the third question, if you discover that your fire department may be gone, how would you feel? Was to understand what their views on regionalization, potential mergers, and consolidation would be for fire departments.
Now, what were the results of these focus groups? First, what we heard from the people we spoke with was fire chiefs are particularly worried about the lack of professional capital within volunteer fire departments. That is, the lack of training for know-how for volunteers that professional fire chiefs have come to expect, from basic logistical procedures to understanding the lingo to the physical capital, from the state of current fire apparatus to the uniforms. If these are not up to standard during a mutual aid call, then it is likely that a fire chief will not rely on that department in the future unless absolutely critical. We also see a need to repair a breakdown in relationships and communications between fire chiefs, and in some cases between the fire chief and their elected officials. There are a lack of engagement tools to professionally and effectively handle a conflict, and more work needs to be done to instill interagency cooperation for the future. Finally, we found a surprising set of results on the issue of consolidation or potential mergers. We spoke to a lot of different fire chiefs, and while this is a multi-step process that could take years to form, some of the volunteer fire chiefs welcomed the idea and understood that if trends continue in the declining direction we're seeing, then they may find that a restructuring process like the efforts of Braddock Ranking or River's Edge might be inevitable. But what do we do in the meantime? For years, the relationship between fire chiefs and elected officials has been predicated on what's known as resource dependency theory. That is, relationships are formed primarily on the basis of those quid pro quo arrangements or the needed financial incentives that are given at stake for volunteer fire departments. This method has deteriorated over the years due to declining demand for fire services and a renewed interest in ways to be more equitable and not just efficient with our resources. As a result, volunteer fire chiefs and elected officials have been under significant pressure to meet each other at different points during a negotiation, which sometimes causes a breakdown in communications if one side cannot meet the other. So we propose this model of thinking is no longer viable, and instead look to a new wave of theory called craftsmanship theory that builds upon this idea of collaborative capacity as a set of activities to create opportunities for engagement with other community leaders and foster a mutually beneficial atmosphere. Instead of zero-sum games, the future for good municipal governance stems from mutually beneficial and inclusive partnerships. And as one of our fire chiefs pointed out in our discussions, there's a sort of a delicate triangle, or a trifecta, if you will, of developing this collaborative capacity between the fire chiefs, the elected officials, and the public to build those critical partnerships that will ultimately empower the community and create good governance. Now, what is the path forward for volunteer fire departments? How do we press on through some of the challenges facing these departments and build that collaborative capacity? As the quote says, ultimately, how do we achieve collective action in the absence of a legal hierarchy? Well, before we get to the recommendations, there are just a few initial ways to develop a framework to start that conversation, which is modeled based on a community-focused approach towards solving the problem. These steps will all be outlined in our Take Action Toolkit that you can see there, which will be a supplemental guide to our main report. The Take Action Toolkit will act as a practical guide for fire chiefs, elected officials, and other relevant stakeholders to develop a framework to more effectively communicate and engage with key stakeholders based on a set of criteria. But essentially, it starts with a few key points or building blocks that were inspired from the book Getting to Yes. Number one, it's important to separate the people from the problem and try to understand their point of view. Number two, once you're in that meeting, focus on the relative interests and where you can find mutual gain rather than pushing someone into a corner. A win-win agreement is the most ideal. Number three, what are the facts? Use objective criteria to find a mutually beneficial agreement. And sometimes when you're in an impasse with a difficult negotiator, it's important to hold all the objective facts at hand. And number four, finally, from all of this, the next step towards building partnerships is preserving those relationships long after your negotiation, long after your meeting with your elected official or fire chief. Now, I'll turn it over to my colleague Zoe, who will give a more detailed analysis of our recommendations to expand on this process.
Informed by our research, we've developed two overarching recommendations. The first is to build partnerships between stakeholders to develop collaborative capacity, where stakeholders include fire departments, elected officials, and the community. This recommendation has a goal to strengthen relationships between and among fire service providers, elected officials, and the community to establish mutual trust and credibility that mitigates transaction costs. And it centers around low effort, low risk opportunities to start conversations, fortify connections, and lay groundwork for future collaborative endeavors. Our second overarching recommendation is to focus efforts on regionalized fire service delivery, with the goal of improving equity, efficiency, sustainability, and cost effectiveness of fire service delivery within Allegheny County. This overarching recommendation centers around bringing together resources that support our volunteer companies and allow them to focus on their primary role as fire service providers. Under our first recommendation to build partnerships among stakeholders to develop collaborative capacity, we have three sub-recommendations to accomplish our goal. The first is to engage in resource sharing to develop mutually beneficial collaborations. Resource sharing can save money by splitting costs of an existing or future asset and can kick off substantial interaction between fire companies in the region. It also creates a space for continued communication and provides a basis for future joint efforts. Resources can not only include apparatus, equipment, and gear, but also things like technology and human capital. This sub-recommendation involves minimal oversight, commitment, and risk. We also recommend providing regional training to create low-stakes environments for fostering concerted operational capacity. This is an opportunity to establish operational procedures for cross-agency response. Coordination in advance of an emergency can improve efficiency and help build professional capital. Our final sub-recommendation under our first recommendation is to adopt proactive educational outreach policies to inform elected officials and the public about the value of fire services. Our firefighters are tasked with quantifying an intangible commodity while competing for scarce resources. Fire service is no longer limited to just fire protection, but also includes things like emergency response, fire prevention education, and community outreach. Firefighters should be proactive in reinforcing their value and opening up lines of communication to build relationships with the elected officials and the public. For our second overarching recommendation to focus efforts on regionalized fire service delivery, we also have three sub-recommendations. The first is to form a regional administrative office to provide support for volunteer companies. Firefighters take on responsibilities beyond firefighting, and administrative duties stretch their already limited time. A regional office can reduce their administrative workload and assist with tasks such as record management, bookkeeping, and grant writing. With the regional office taking care of the day-to-day administrative responsibilities, our volunteers can focus on the inputs that are directly related to fire services. We also recommend codifying standards for levels of service and training across Allegheny County to provide inter-network accountability and increase jurisdictional equity. As a preliminary step, this is an opportunity to open up a dialogue among stakeholders. It also ensures that all municipalities receive at least a base level of service, rather than service that is entirely dependent on community wealth. And it can help improve accountability. Elected officials and the public can call on fire service providers to ensure that they meet the standards, and fire departments have a basis to request resources that allow them to meet those regional standards. And finally, we recommend undertaking a regional strategic planning process to begin shared service provision. This will allow the region to address its fire service delivery issues in a collaborative, coordinated forum. Strategic planning can increase public value through clarifying goals, informing and implementing strategies to meet those goals. And it can also help build coalitions, improve stakeholder engagement, and refocus conversations around the common good. So, we wanted to share with you this quote from one of our focus group participants in closing. Our decision-making process has to be based on what is best for the community we serve. If we put this at the forefront, we can overcome anything. Many regions in the United States have been facing similar issues with fire service delivery. The volunteer fire crisis in Pennsylvania has been a conversation topic since 1970, when the Governor's Commission on Fire Prevention and Control released Pennsylvania Burning. The solutions for improving fire services are well established. We have the skills, knowledge, and power in this region to make the change. We all just need to take that first step together. And now we'd like to open the floor for any questions, comments, or suggestions that you all have for us.
Great. So perfect. Everyone's pinned. Okay. Hi, everybody. Our Capstone report is on the strategies for regional climate action here in Connect. How to best build a coordinated plan or program that helps members address climate change together. We currently have 6 communities working on climate action plans here in Connect, pictured there on the left. Special thanks to Cindy Bond, Patty DeMarco, Mary Ellen Ramage, Brittany Reno, and Joe Varhola, and everybody else that worked on these plans. We would like to acknowledge all of their hard work over the past year and for giving us information for our research as Connect starts to think about this regionally. So before we get into our research and recommendations, we're going to briefly mention why this matters. Climate overlays with many of our other issues, inversion events, flooding, landslides that threaten health and damage property and roads here in Connect. It's so closely related to our other major stormwater, energy, and environmental issues that Connect deals with every day in our region. We have a handful of climate action plans, but as you know, these sorts of climate issues don't stop at a single border, and neither do the emissions that contribute to them. Connect recognized that regional cooperation is the only way we can actually address climate change and facilitate long-term sustainability in the region. So in the legislative session of 2020, it passed a resolution that seeks to support these existing plans, facilitate new ones, and lay the groundwork for a regional climate action plan. Given that's what members want to move toward, our research has been focused on helping Connect figure out how it can get there, identifying challenges, best practices, and opportunities. A little bit about us. I'm Eric Robb, and along with Yuan Zhang and Yaoduji Yang, we're researchers at the University of Pittsburgh GSPIA. Together, we've compiled relevant data sets, and we've interviewed a number of regional climate plans around Pennsylvania, as well as a bunch of other people. And with those, we put together a report and this presentation for you all. We're going to talk about the data needs for this effort and how members can benefit, the strategy for a successful regional plan based on our research, and finally, the government infrastructure and the people that are needed for an effort like this to be successful. We're going to get to these points, and then we're going to have a 10 to 15-minute conversation at the end, so hold your questions. It may be helpful to think about it this way as I present. The Climate Action Plan feels like the final product for this effort, but it really isn't. We actually have to start thinking about this as a process not a plan. The process and the people at the table matter. That's like the final product for this work more so than the plan itself. One thing that we've learned from looking at dozens of CAPS climate action plans is that many times they end up on a shelf if the long-term people and process aren't there. So if Connect members want this to be enduring, the pieces that are missing is who's involved, how we organize it, and how we can get better at using and collecting the data. So that brings us to the first chunk of our findings, which is it's way too hard to get the data. Just as one example, virtually every municipality in the region doesn't track or benchmark their annual energy consumption. And it's not because they don't want to understand their energy or try to reduce energy costs. It's because once you start trying to get the data, I've done it twice now, and I know several of you have as well. I understand why they aren't tracking it. It's really laborious to get. There are barriers to receiving this data from your utility, from all of those utilities that you see on the screen there. It's daunting. This is something that I heard from you all loud and clear at the August exec committee meeting, and from talking to some of you individually, is that you'd like to track this, but it's just currently way too hard. The good news is that every successful multi-municipal and regional climate program that we talked to had some way to streamline the data gathering process for their member municipalities. So our recommendation is that Connect work towards having an automated or an easier way for your utilities, the data keepers, to get your data to you, the data owners, in two ways. That's one, by sending a Connect letter from municipalities to utilities to form an annual or a semi-annual agreement with utilities to automatically give you the data, rather than going through that lengthy right to know process that I know none of you like. One of the regional plans we talked to did this exact same thing. And second, it's to create a place to store and position you to use the data. We already had some really good conversations with Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center, and we're talking about what that platform might look like to best serve members. But no matter what comes out of this process, it'll be extremely beneficial to members to get better at collecting that data and positioning ourselves to use it. Once you have that data, one of the most important things to consider when attempting to explore regional climate collaboration is strategy, or how a program's actually set up. So we talked to 4 regional entities, 3 here in Pennsylvania and 1 in DC, each of which has attempted to have their own regional intergovernmental program that assisted local governments with climate action. There was a lot of variety in strategy and success, but the next slide tells you a little about the variety that we did find. From those conversations, we've identified the following as some of the key milestones for a successful regional strategy. Those we talked to is on the left side of this matrix, and key milestones are on the top, split into setup and implementation of a regional plan. Important to note is that in our discussions with their sustainability manager, Erie County stressed to us how hard it was for their program not having these things in place. And based on these criteria, for setting up a regional climate program, the most important things that Connect could do is to house this program or process in an appropriate organization that can dedicate staff, whether that's first incubating the program in Connect or elsewhere like the SPC. Second is to create an advisory board representing and made up of local municipalities. 100% of the established regional programs that we studied had some form of advisory body representing local government and stakeholders. We'll go into more detail about this, who should be engaged in this later. And then finally, Connect should attempt to set mutual member-wide targets that are realistically achievable. In many cases, municipalities set their own individual targets, but there was usually always a greater overarching standardized target that helped members reach their goals together and individually. So that's set up. And if you look to the right side of the chart, we move into best practices for implementation, or how municipalities can actually participate in a coordinated plan. The 2 main ways would best be described as joint or connectivity levels of participation. And visualized here, joint participation is where the collaborative of members collectively develops and delivers shared regional goals and emissions reduction actions together or in groups. And that's as opposed to connectivity level participation in a climate program, where the collaborative has to independently create their own climate agendas and only shares information among members. The most successful regional collaboratives that we interviewed operated under this joint form of participation you see on the left. So for planning or implementing a program, we recommend that Connect encourage that joint participation of members. It's simply more effective from what we've seen. And perhaps most importantly, focus the regional plan, at least initially, on high value municipal actions. Everybody we talked to focused on municipal actions first, which were typically cost savings from energy efficiency, hazard mitigation, and actions that satisfy constituent wants for climate action. This ensured high value in member participation, which drove the success of the entire group. And Connect could do the same. Pick a few actions that give the highest value to members and then build the program or process up from there. So we've talked a lot about how to do it regionally, but it's also important to note that successful climate action is both regional and individual at the same time. So municipalities always want to do their own environmental projects. Those individual efforts are just as important to climate action as these regional coordinated ones. But many times municipalities don't have the time or the administrative capacity to actually deal with additional environmental issues on top of the ones they already deal with every day. Moreover, in our research of financial data, in a health department study, which scores municipalities on environmental need, we found that those municipalities that don't have as much capacity are often those with the most environmental need. As you can see on the nice map on the right that was made by Yaodaji, darker blue is higher environmental need, and parts of Connect can be actually 20% higher than the county average for environmental needs. So something needs to be done. Luckily, government infrastructure such as environmental advisory councils, sustainability boards, planning commissions, they can all exist to help increase capacity to work on things like climate action. They've been critical to the development of climate action plans elsewhere, but unfortunately they're currently underutilized here in Western Pennsylvania. Of all Connect members, there are only 5 EACs here, a few of which actually don't even meet regularly, shown on the map in red, and they're not located, if you can see, in many of the areas in most environmental need in Connect. We know that many times municipalities don't set up EACs because of a lack of interest or volunteers, or they just don't know how to go about it. But to overcome these challenges and increase capacity, our recommendation is to actually encourage the formation of shared EACs for Connect members. And that way, not every municipality would need one. Pennsylvania statutes actually allow the development of shared environmental advisory councils. Neighboring municipalities can form a shared EAC to help advise municipalities on the projects that they want to complete. And when interviewing a number of people on the topic, they told us that EACs were really a good way to increase the administrative capacity of local governments to tackle environmental projects and conduct community engagement around them. Metro DC COG said that 10 years ago when they started climate planning, none of their municipalities had environmental advisory committees or like their analogs in DC. And now every single municipality has one in some form or another 10 years later. So they're really important. By doing something similar like this in Connect, members could bolster their ability to work on all kinds of environmental projects that they might not have been able to before. So now that we've talked about data, strategy, infrastructure, we need to talk about the people. They're the most important. Who should be involved and how to best engage the people that we need as a part of climate planning. The studies and the people that we talked to all rated stakeholder engagement as the single most important collaborative activity in making impact. We found that some of the most effective ways that Connect can engage these necessary stakeholders in a regional effort is through forming some sort of advisory body. We mentioned this earlier, people within Connect that could guide the development of the process for everybody and is representative of everybody. Based on Yuan's research of 20 plus climate action plans, an advisory group that Connect would want to form should consist of people like local managers, representation from academic institutions, both students and professors. We're lucky we have so many universities around here, members of planning commissions and facilities management, since a lot about climate plans is about integrating sustainability into existing planning and government operations, and then elected and appointed officials for added legitimacy and representation of constituents. The majority of plans that we looked at all had local and elected appointed officials involved. Luckily, this is something that Connect is really good at. Outside of a task force, we recommend that Connect also engage some really key stakeholders like businesses and utilities, as they're some of the harder ones to get involved, but they're most important to emissions reductions. The commercial sector takes up a large percentage of emissions. And of course, utilities are the ones that actually have your data. COGs, although climate action is primarily an advocacy type of effort, it's beneficial to engage councils of government as they have already done work on land projects, municipal solar, joint purchasing of vehicles, stormwater, solid waste, all things that you would find in a comprehensive climate action plan. Or if nothing else, COGs have been a really effective communication outlet for some of those that we talked to. After center region, Metro DC regional plans are actually organized by COGs in the first place. And finally, most obviously, Connect needs to make sure to engage the community. We live in a county where a large majority, 67% of residents are worried about climate change. We can engage them through outreach, EACs, and community organizations. And Yawan compiled a list of community organizations and environmental community organizations located within Connect for their full report for each of you to see. So if Connect wants to build a regional process or a program, here are some of our main takeaways. We need to work closer with utilities and data collectives to get your valuable data to you easier, more often and ready to use. That's going to build the foundation for this project. Members should decide on how they want to organize a joint program, what they want out of it, like whether they want more energy cost savings, hazard mitigation, or both. And finally, Connect should work toward building up the necessary capacity and people around this issue to make a regional program a success through a task force, partnerships, and the community. So you have all these things here already in Connect. It's just a matter of bringing it all together. Just to reiterate how important this is, we did an estimate based on last year's communities. What we found was really important. Together, Connect members are estimated to emit the equivalent of 80% of Pittsburgh's total annual emissions every year. That's really significant. Cities typically get all the attention when it comes to emissions, but this shows that for those communities that don't think that they can have an impact on climate change or that Pittsburgh's more important, this shows that municipalities are equally as important to solving the climate issue in our region. More and more municipalities are taking these steps. Connect is even ahead of the curve. We just need to solve some of these data issues, figure out a good strategy, build up our people power around it. And by doing these things, Connect members could play a really big role in a regional solution to climate change. So thank you for listening. Make sure to check out our full report. Here are our emails in case you would like to reach out. But right now, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have or discuss anything that you might want to talk about.
I'll start by sharing my screen here. And then Hui can get us going.
Hello everyone, our Capstone project is titled How to Recycle Challenges, Trends and Opportunities in Our Region. Our project is exploring the most problematic materials our community struggles to recycle, how to recycle materials. For this part, let me introduce our researchers. Gabriella Bryant, a second-year student of MPIA, and she majors in security intelligence and minors in cybersecurity policy and law. Wenyu Zhao, a second-year student of MPA, and she majors in policy research and analysis. And I'm Hui Ding, a second-year student of MPA, and I major in policy research and analysis too.
So we'd like to first thank a few contributors to this project, which include Ali Walker, Ashley DeGrigio, and Dr. Patricia DeMarco, who without their help meeting us, sharing their insights, and truly helping us shape the direction of this project, it wouldn't be the same without them. So thank you very much. So to start out, we need to talk about what we're doing here today. So as I think most of us are aware, Pennsylvania has suffered from the effects of single stream recycling since its implementation in the 1980s. Pennsylvania residents face a personal responsibility to recycle these items known as hard to recycle, which include a variety of household items that tend to be wish cycled or just completely disposed of. And our project will outline some major problems with the current Pennsylvania hard to recycling system and changes that need to be made in addition to opportunities to improve our current system. So first, we need to understand the problem. We've identified several major issues that have prevented our region from implementing an efficient and effective recycling system that properly handles hard to recycle materials. The questions that tend to hinder us the most are the following. Who is responsible for handling these materials? How much will it cost to handle these materials? And what incentive is there for recycling these materials? According to the current Pennsylvania recycling codes, counties and municipalities are individually responsible for creating, funding, and implementing their own recycling programs. To reduce costs and time while improving residential participation, Pennsylvania has enacted over 1,050 curbside pickup single stream recycling programs and 870 drop-off municipal landfills to account for our large rural population.
Oh, sorry, I have to interrupt you. We're getting some comments that if you could share your screen a different way, they could see the whole slide.
How much are they seeing? Let me see. I'm sorry.
Stuck on Meet the Researchers right now. It seems to be sharing the whole browser window instead of the presentation. That might be the problem.
Dang, okay, hold on one second. Oh, I see where the problem lies. So as I just discussed, single stream recycling hinders the efficacy of recycling efforts for hard to recycle materials totally, and then foregoing more efficient options in favor of value-added option hinders overall recycling. And then these are the main problems: responsibility, cost, and incentive. So as we all know, in the name of high participation and low variable cost, the current system does not account for a large portion of household items that invariably end up in municipal landfills, such as glass, e-waste, and tires. In the worst cases, particular items such as tires end up being dumped on hillsides, or in the case of glass, mixed in with contaminated items, disqualifying them from recycling. In a 2018 report, researchers discovered the 8 municipalities in the top graph shown here contain 50% of Allegheny County's total tire dumps, which are 468 dumps total. The bottom graph also demonstrates the distribution of the total 27,000 tires found across all dumping sites in our county. The question of who is responsible and how much does it cost stagnates the recycling process and leads to further problems down the line. However, they have shown to be extremely impactful on hard to recycle materials that just seem easier to dump in a landfill, as exemplified in our current single stream recycling practice. Due to the constant battle between resident and local government over the 3 problems mentioned, Pennsylvania has embraced single stream recycling, which requires low levels of personal responsibility, which is cheap, which has high participation rates, and provides an incentive for local participation. Ultimately, many single stream recycled materials still end up in landfills due to contamination and improper sorting procedures.
After summarizing our problems, we are going to make international comparisons of 2 countries, including Japan and China. This part includes the importance of international comparisons and some detailed differences of policies, technologies, outputs, and outcomes between 2 countries. For this part is about why international comparisons are important. We hope to summarize the similarities and differences of the policies by comparing the waste tire recycling policies of different countries and regions. We can learn more about the tire recycling technology in various regions and compare the costs and benefits of different technical methods. In the process of comparing the impact of different technical means, we formulate policies that meet the characteristics of the region to further reduce the pollution generated in the production process, so that the later products produced can meet the demand for resource shortages. For this part, let me introduce Mitsubishi Corporation in Japan. A joint pilot project was established in 2000 to produce 0.4 nanomaterials from scrap tires. They use waste hydrocarbons to produce high-tech materials that can reduce emissions and increase energy efficiency. In addition, it can also reduce the cost of raw materials and achieve maximum resource efficiency. The advanced technology and experience of Japan for recycling with tires is worth learning. And for China in Shandong province, Shandong Kaiyuan Renfeng Environmental Protection Technology Company has built a 60,000 ton year waste tire thermocorrecting production line, which has realized the safe, environmentally friendly, and energy-saving production and operation conditions. through thermal cracking of 1 ton of waste tires, approximately 0.35 tons of carbon black, 0.45 tons of waste rubber oil, and 0.12 tons of steel wire and some combustible gases can be produced. It is safer and more environmentally friendly, saves energy, and has a good overall economy, which is in line with the development trend of the times.
After getting to know our problems and the introduction of international comparisons, we are going to start the part 2 case study for glass. Our report includes 3 case studies, one which we have already touched on is tire recycling and management. We will also analyze Pennsylvania's current recycling trends of glass and e-waste in our final report. In this presentation, we will introduce glass particularly due to its very nature. The glass recycling is a missed opportunity since it is widely accepted to be a highly recyclable material. However, in places like the South Hills, south of Pittsburgh, the municipality stopped accepting glass as a recyclable material due to the cost associated with transportation due to weight and the additional processing requirements. Material recovery facilities are cutting glasses from curbside recycling program to cut the costs. Despite these setbacks, however, discussions with glass recycling experts at PRC have assured that glass is highly recyclable and produce a very stable value over time. To reduce the cost of recycling glass, promoting the multi-stream waste collection is useful since it cuts the cost of sorting and cleaning a lot. Now let's begin the technology part. Our assessment of recycling opportunities includes the various technologies currently used to target hard-to-recycle materials and opportunities for our region to implement any variation of such technology. We'll see that mass burning is the most common technology to deal with hard-to-recycle waste, since the costs are low without the processing of sorting and cleaning those materials. But the processing produces greenhouse gas, ash, and sometimes toxic materials into the environment. Also, some unburnable residues will be landfilled. However, pyrolysis is a new trend because it can deal with the waste problem and the source of energy problem at the same time. It can produce boil oil and boil char as a new resource of energy, which can be eco-friendly, but pyrolysis cannot replace the mass burning due to their high cost. It is necessary to strictly control the composing of raw materials to control the quality of the products, which greatly improve the difficulty of obtaining high-quality raw materials. The multi-stream sorting can reduce the cost for sorting a lot. In conclusion, one of the reasons why mass burning and landfill still cannot be replaced by new techs is the high cost for sorting the waste. Ensuring the waste stream are pure is among one of the key challenges facing effective recycling, and it is the future trend.
In order to address some harmful recycling trends in our region, our group plans to make calculated policy recommendations for regional policymakers. First, establish a multi-stream recycling system.
We believe through analyzing international protocols and procedures, in addition to discussions with experts previously credited, that multi-stream recycling is the only efficient and effective method to recycle. Multi-stream recycling hastens the process of returning used materials back into the economy and begins the process for a circular economy.
Second, invest in recycling collection and processing infrastructure.
Many of the issues we've laid out in our report share common hindrances due to the lack of infrastructure in collection and processing. So through investment in better infrastructure for collection and processing, our regional recycling efforts will see increased efficiency, participation, and incentivization. Lack of infrastructure is a result of lack of funding due to reallocation of funds to other worthy causes. However, we can no longer afford to ignore the building tire piles in our backyards or the building collections of glass in our basements.
Through dedicated task forces in financially neglected regions to establish uniform recycling protocols.
In our report, we discuss how underfunded communities throughout our country and our county are the first to lose recycling program funding and are often bearing the heaviest burden of misplaced materials or landfills. Redistribution of the county budget to account for these communities will not only benefit these underfinanced communities, but will help streamline the future recycling system we hope Allegheny County is able to achieve. In recycling, the efforts of the few cannot outweigh the efforts of the majority, so we cannot forget those who need our attention the most. And that concludes our presentation. We'd like to thank you all for coming and listening to us. So now we'd like to open the floor for questions and comments if anybody has any. And lastly, if you feel free to comment or to contact any of us after this is over.
Recording. So I'd love everyone to unmute and clap for the recording and for all 4 of the Connect Capstone teams. You did great. I'll ask that all the students, we have your email addresses in your presentations. We'll be emailing out this recording along with notes with the recording to kind of jump to your favorite spot, along with the reports as soon as they're ready. So look for that early next week or maybe mid next week. And we hope the folks that are especially interested in the volunteer fire or the future of fire service delivery will join us at our every other Wednesday at 12:30 meetings with that group that was the advisory team. They will be ongoing, and DCED is interested in furthering this work with us as a region as we continue to explore. And for those that are very interested in the Regional Climate Action Plan and the recycling work, we will be having our Economic and Environmental Development Working Group Thursday, December 17th. And so if you're in that working group, you'll already get the email. But if you'd like to join that working group, feel free to put your email in the chat. Other than that, I wish you all a very safe and happy holiday season. And I thank you all so much for the work that you've done, students, advisors, and everybody who showed up here today. Please feel free to leave love in the chat for the students. And if the students don't mind staying a little bit extra onto this Zoom as everyone heads out. If folks want an opportunity to network, I'd be more than happy to connect folks. Anyone that you want to talk to, I'm happy to link you guys together. And with that, happy Capstone Presentations Day, guys. You did it.
Yeah, congratulations, y'all did a great job.
Thank you, Lydia.